Hello, dear people. How are you? Welcome back. And thank you for following us up till now. Today, we're going to speak about something that I personally find utterly fascinating, and it is something that is inside in my book. I think these are the first works that when I was working on them, there was like such epiphanies that kind of came about uh, that was the first time that I was contemplating extending my own work past the art, past the production of art, and anchoring my thoughts into something different.
So these are the seeds that led to your book. This is where the thought started.
Exactly. I mean, one of the I'm paroling freedom as one of the main parameters that have pushed me towards art, but there is also something else. And ever since I was little, I was very interested in fundamental questions. It's a bit, again, like life is such a weird thing. It's such an odd thing. I initially intended my whole life, I wanted to study psychology. I was utterly fascinated by the human mind and its capacity to travel, traverse, and transfer a great amount of information, and then out of that structure something new. So art for me, especially the early period, has been investigation of such topics and these dimensions that occur. However, I found myself in a spot where I was frozen. I think it's just one of those things that when you come to understand what it truly means to be petrified by fear or frozen by fear, it becomes a very interesting dimension, because I wasn't only focused that I was in that state. I was utterly fascinated that a state as such can occur to begin with, especially there is a lot of knowledge contained within my body of a lot of different topics and a lot of different dimensions, and I was very fascinated to see that knowledge did not extend itself past my fear.
Your thoughts around this, did that have to do with the prolongedness of the state? Because I think paralyzed with fear is something that is an experience that people have to a varying degree at different points through their life, but I'm not sure if people normally experience extended.
That's true. I mean, especially it was very fascinating for me because as a dentist, I was used to having emergency cases where, like, petrified by fear was not part of my response at all. It wasn't part of my cycle, in the sense that I mean, that's not true. In a good Virgo spirit, I'm always very, very scared in the beginning, and then I kind of just went on. I think my father has turned gray when he was trying to learn to swim, because I could sit literally for 4 hours and absolutely refuse to go into the water until he pushed me from a pier one time, and then he drew.
I was gonna say this gives some context to the much familiar story.
Yes, I mean, but that's I think. But I think it's not until I was left alone with my fear that I actually kind of came to really to understanding how deeply embedded it is within me, and it would surface in new situations, especially like in new situations, especially later in the social connection contexts. But I've never experienced. But I would always manage to push through, as like people do. That's what evolution is in many ways. You push yourself. But this time around, I couldn't do anything. I mean, wow. Like, still looking back at it, it's a very fascinating period for me. And these works that I'm going to show you have all occurred during the same period while I was creating salmonella, fluff, and snickles, pot noodles as well. So they kind of occurred simultaneously. And
We can definitely say that if we were talking about subconscious creation the last time, this is maybe the epiphany of subconscious creation.
I think you can say that very well, like as you pointed out, because um, I would. It has taken me forever to finish the pieces that we spoke about last episode, out of many reasons, and but in the moments where I would stop and just, but there was a part of me that wanted to push my freedom even more. I wanted to be absolutely I wanted my movement on canvas to be completely unhinged. And yet every single time I was thinking about the cost of canvas, the size, the cost of paints, my own personal trajectory, the coordinates, just an overwhelming amount of thoughts that were equally real and not real materialize. They left me paralyzed and not necessarily wanting to. I felt there was more I wanted to say. I wanted there was so much more that I wanted to express, and the strength of it pushed me, but to such an extent that I couldn't move. But then, as I was mixing color, because I mixed my color on a glass plate, placed on a table, and I have painted that with gray on the background, so it could be neutral, so that I would see how I would mix my colors. I started just dabbling and messing, and I started finding a voice that I could assimilate myself with. Because what was difficult with me is that just kind of like giving the extent of my own personal experience and coming to an extent where I understand meaning with high granularity. I mean, just the context of my upbringing and the situation within that scope has been of such dimensions that one grows up quite quickly. I was thinking about what was political, economical, and social already at the age of 11, 12, because those were the circumstances. I mean, obviously, I had parents that were interested in those topics, but I was very focused on that, and at the same time, my mother, me being a neurologist and psychiatrist, kind of allowed for my mind to exist within a certain granularity of apprehension. So part of me wanted to paint these big canvases, as we have spoken about, where I've created salmonella and snickles and etc. But part of me really wanted to push for more freedom and to be freer. So while I was mixing colors, I just started moving, and those are the first times where I started to move again freely ish. And that is the dimension where the process, my own process, starting to breach the parameters that have been established by fear.
So I have a few questions regarding how this actually played out in practice, because you're obviously working on these other rather sizable works, and then you have this table where you come to do your mixing and everything. So this and did you become aware during the mixing of color that something was being created, or you were creating something? Did you sense that freedom whilst you were mixing, or is this more of a discovery that was done afterwards, that some sort of expression had happened?
Well, I guess I will answer that question from a different side. What I want to say is that I wanted to express myself. Like, I wanted my mind to be free, and I wanted the part of my personality that is kind of like that essence that have resided in me, that has not it cannot be not affected by war. But if you would like, do you remember that after we saw Neon Genesis Evangelion, you called me Pino for a while?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think, and you can confirm or affirm, no, you can confirm or deny this, but I feel my personality is quite a lot like Pinot. Like I'm just kind of this like cute, lovable ball of fur and energy that kind of just pops out and wants to just spray everything with confetti. And the reason for that is that I've just learned that through, like, if you want to fight darkness within, you kind of have to push in a different direction. So I wanted my works to be that. I wanted my works to be the representation. Like, if any of you, I mean, I assume some of you have watched Paprika, the cartoon, the anime. And if you kind of, if anybody of you recalls Paprika the Parade, I think you have a very good picture of how my mind works. Like, I see shapes and colors everywhere, and all of that is connected to meaning. It's one of the reasons why I used to love, like, why I also still love fashion, because I just see all these different dimensions of references that kind of come together for us to act out a fantasy, but also within that scope we create a fantasy. So it's the same thing with my artworks. I want to project that part of my mind because I know that that part of my mind was the key to my coming back to this world. And but every single time I would try to do that on canvas, I failed utterly. Like I could not. I was doing some of it on iPad, but it wasn't it. But this time, when I was just making a lot of mess on the table, I started recognizing shapes and forms. Suddenly my mind started understanding the structure of, or like structures within my mind, and what was presented on that table were kind of fitting together. So I just started moving, and I would move for just a couple of inches, just like small incremental portions, and then image would occur.
I really do wonder, because it's interesting what you're saying there. I do wonder if how much it had to say that this was a very unconnected space to everything else. It didn't have the pressure of a canvas. It didn't have the expense. It didn't have any of those concepts that you were feeling the weight on from the other places. Also, I would almost say that it's very hard to go on a big canvas and express yourself without having some underlying essence of perfection in you. But this is your mixing table. Like, it is as free as it can get from all the concepts above.
But that's the interesting thing with freedom. Like I was thinking about it now, because like I still can't, like I can understand factors that have kind of gone into me coming to stage where I was in a state where where my movement was very hindered, but simultaneously I can't. And it makes and one of the reasons why I've achieved a lot in my life is because I've learned how to let go. I've learned how to enter that state of inner peace where just like, okay, cool, and just go away. And it was very fascinating. And then I would still do my thing and things would turn out well. But it was very fascinating for me to enter this state where I've given myself freedom to do exactly that. But by doing so, I ended up binding myself in a very bizarre way. So it is not like it's not as, when you think about it, like it comes as no surprise that I was able to let go since this came without pressure. But I could not understand, I still can't grasp why I was not able to let go on canvas, because these pieces have come about through this dimension where nothing mattered, where I was not bound by anything, or at least for a very brief moment in time.
Whilst interacting with the pieces behind.
Yeah.
I believe that, but I definitely think that with the bigger pieces, I think So the time frame it has taken to get to this place you are at now, I don't think that was the time frame that you were picturing whilst working on the other series. And I think that is probably some of the things that created that fear, that they were taking longer time than you predicted. They were moving outside of the schedule that you were comfortable with. And I think those are the things that made it hard for you to express yourself freely there compared to on this very different style.
Definitely. And I also think there's this dimension of layering and layers and peeling. Like, I have entered a very strong, like, throughout my upbringing, I've entered in a very strong dissonance with myself. And I don't believe there is one self. We have 37 trillion cells in the body, and that's an 37 trillion single units that each exist autonomously, and then they enter into a choir. So I don't think there is this one self in that dimension, in that context. But I also think that there was a part of me that wanted that was not assimilated with myself, neither my actions nor my words nor a lot of things. And I'm not sure how that ties. Like, we were kind of going back to the unified dimension versus the split one. For example, I've had always an experience of a split self. From a very early age, I could hear the voices in my head telling me, giving character and meaning to my existence, but at a different level than I've comprehended other children do. And I still, like, I don't have a unified sense of self. I just see self through the means of through means of action and reaction. So I don't anchor myself into this unified principle in a sense. But it was very interesting to me to see how how can we know things before they've ever happened? How can we have intuition about things that haven't happened, and yet then we have ability to resonate whether we want this or not? I mean, obviously we're kind of discussing a bit of evolutionary and evolution and genetics and a lot of different things, but the point is that the concepts are not very much different than the ones that extended this externality. So these pieces, these colors, I think kind of represent my inner. This kind of like naive world where cute animals, weird animals jump around and everybody's happy and everybody's just kind of like...
It's very soothing, and yeah, I think it's a very soothing landscape.
Yeah,
it's very pleasurable.
So this landscape kind of comes in with a table glued on the back side, because this is my mixing table. So, but what became apparent to me as I was working is that initially I always thought that I would do abstraction. Like, I was very drawn to abstraction. And obviously with my desire to free myself, I think the narrative that I've been following are within that scope. But then at the same time, there was this like cute and pink and fluffy creature that wanted to come out and merge the two. I think like Robert now has done a very nice job of kind of opening that dimension up in a very in a gorgeous way. However, I was going in a bit of a different direction, and the table isn't obviously the only thing I was painting at. All of my mixing boards ended up like this. This is another one. My spatulas, and the pizza box. These are actually, I loved painting on pizza boxes.
So is this pure mixing, or is it also painted on afterwards?
No, it's this one. Well, no, I was mixing colors on all of these. So none of these have been intended as canvases. I was mixing my colors, and then it is kind of one of those beautiful moments. Like if you've been working hard, it's late at night, and then you just suddenly start staring at something, and then things open up. But that made me aware of something very different, something much more interesting, I think. And that is that at the core of my existence, there has always been this question of why things happen. I said that I wanted to study psychology, and I said that my but I always contemplate why things happen. I think my brain is a non-stop. I mean, everybody's brain is a non-stop machine, but I think you know better than everyone how much information passes through my mind and how I
You are definitely on quite a bit more, and I think actively engaging with these questions at a much higher rate than a lot of people around you.
exactly. I mean, exactly correct answer. Great. You're being a very good Christian right now. You're a great Christian. But what I'm trying to say is that I'm utterly fascinated by how this planet kind of came up. If not if how it came about, but in the sense, in the social and cultural sense, and political and economic, I'm very fascinated. And maybe that has to do with what I have been brought up with. But I'm very fascinated by this dimension where things travel. And I was looking at the process of my own process, and I was thinking how the process extends itself. We constantly territorialize and deterritorialize. I mean, not only we, it seems that's the inherent function of the process itself, where the self is not contained only within the vessel. And I think there is a very interesting narrative there, because what we're speaking about is these dimensions of transfer and extension. I'm sorry, you wanted to say something?
No, just continue.
So, if you take a piece of paper and you scrunch it in your hand, what you will observe is that crunching will be a direct parallel to the force and placement exhibited on the paper, or extended to the paper. So the paper's shape and form will be reciprocal to the forces that have conjured it.
Combined with the paper's properties, but yes.
Of course, yes, thank you. So I started looking at that, and I was quite fascinated by the fact that this is this dimension of extension that I'm speaking about. So my mind, my thoughts, my force has been utilized in such a way that it has extended itself on a paper that will never again become white, it will never become smooth. And within it, whether it's unfolded or scrunched, it bears within itself this extension of the act, but also of everything that has preceded that act. It acts as a token of information that, if one has ability to look at it granular, and I know there are people that have absolutely bizarre abilities to discern information from a lot of things, but for most of us, it will just look like a scrunch paper. But this idea that of the extended self started becoming quite fascinating to me. And I see that we've forgotten a couple of pieces over there that I wanted to show you, but I guess they will be portrayed later on the Instagram or on Twitter. And no, it's X now, it's not Twitter anymore. um, but I find it fascinating because I always contemplate why the world is as it is, why certain people go up, why certain people go down, what happens within the dimension of connection within the places we meet each other, especially in the context. Like, I think it's also very fascinating to think about like how when you meet people, I mean, you and me are very different in this sense. Like, I have very high granularity of recognition of people's faces and like how people interact, and from that on I can kind of assemble the movement or how to interact with people given that information, while you're much more anchored in your own apprehension.
So you are seeing and recognizing patterns that you are utilizing in regards to your experience with how you've seen that before.
Exactly. So patterns.
And yes, I'm definitely doing it a bit differently, less consciously at least.
You have a different approach and different upbringing, but I'm always just interested. Like, it's so fascinating to observe the existence from the point of where we are individuals that inherently do not think that something is magic, for example, exists. We don't believe in a lot of dimensions, and a lot of those dimensions that have kind of that exist still in the world exist under the banner of mysticism and the occult. But
So what do you mean by this?
so, for example, this was actually a bit fun. This is a good example of that. While I was watching something on YouTube, and then I saw that in the early Egypt, mothers. Please let this be early Egypt. If I don't, if I, I hope that I'm not recalling it wrongly. But the mothers had a tendency to give children two names, and the one name was their true name that only her would know, and the other name was given to the public. And here comes why the reason why this was. And this is because the mothers did not want their children to be cursed through means of their own, through their name, through their real name, meaning that like being afraid that that will inflict higher harm on them. So that's like a good example of mysticism and folklore that has kind of gone lost in the technological age. However, what is happening there? Do you find it? Do you understand where I'm going to go with here? This.
Well, first of all, I think that's a perplexing means to an issue that they chose to give two names. It's like I should have the sole right of cursing you by your right name. It's but yes, it's absolutely an interesting way to handle that issue.
Oh, I'm sorry, that issue, that particular issue, just like
Well,
it keeps happening, and they were so smart in the beginning.
Well, how was I going to say? It's hard to be in society without ever being cursed. So it was definitely a very pressing matter that most likely would occur at one point, but
but
it seems a bit excessive.
yeah, was it?
Surface level.
Yeah, surface level, but that's the thing. Like, that's the fascinating dimension. Like, I think that's the most. I mean, yes, world is a very trippy place. But I think that is a very good example of what I'm trying to say. So we don't believe in this dimension of information being having the capacity. Like, it's a bizarre thing. I don't think people have thought of it like that. I don't think today we don't think about these dimensions having capacity to traverse space and time to affect anyone other than the one kind of a cursing potentially, because you're thinking, oh, bad mojo. Like, if you're in a bad mood and you're cursing somebody, that's your own mirror box. It won't affect anyone else. However, that is not entirely true. I think that what there is this dimension that escapes us, that our existence is that constant extension and territorialization where we are carriers of what is happening. And if you look at Wi-Fi, for example, I think this is very interesting speaking about in the context of Wi-Fi. If you spoke to people, I think some 20 years ago, about information traveling through unseen channels that will be able to deliver to their devices every imaginable form of news, I think people would be very reluctant.
To today's extent, most definitely. But if you say 40 years ago, then you definitely.
But let's say, but I want to say actually something 20 years ago because it is quite recent. So there are many people that will believe in these supernatural dimensions of both theological underpinnings and occult ones. So we speak of God, we speak of ghosts, we speak of etc., 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 cursing. And then the question becomes, do we actually believe that this type of, because it's not a question of whether we have seen it or not. The question is whether this type of information can be retained and can be transferred, as in the context of cursing, to actually affect the person in question. And I think just 20 years ago, we would ascribe a lot of things a higher degree of reverence than we do today. Because today, when you think about Wi-Fi, it is essentially something that is unseen, that is sending out information within the scope of where air of like it is fascinating again because we see empty. When we say empty space, we mean this, but this is not empty. This, if air was colored, I would not be able to see my hand, but it's not empty. We are in this amber like structure where we don't think that things have capacity to travel, but they do. We keep affirming that they have the ability to travel.
You're saying that it is a conductor that is able to lead certain information.
Exactly. And artist as a conductor in this sense is not something new. However, I do feel that when artists decide upon the subject they want to work with, or in the context of painters, maybe they don't, maybe they just want to let themselves go in the similar way as I did, you kind of contemplate on yourself as a conductor, and then you kind of contemplate the piece. But people very rarely contemplate why, how, what. I mean, sure what, but not to the extent that I think it's interesting to observe the world through. I'm sorry, this probably is just my own musings, but the depth of the informational loop that exists seems to be much more complex than we initially thought of. And I think these works and the next couple of topics that we will introduce later on are all connected to this dimension of why, what, how, and this understanding that every single thing that we do, every single step we take are highly connected to this idea of the extension. And I think, sorry.
Are you then speaking of the extension, or are you also speaking of that they are traces or parts in becoming you? Or that there tells about you and your persona? Because everything that has happened on this table is a result of conscious and unconscious movements that you have been doing throughout a certain time period. And they all, in a manner, like, of course today it's quite hard, like in general when you look at a person today, we don't have the granularity to look into or especially look back in time, where you can take a segment of someone's life and you can look at how they folded their sweater with which force, where is the crinkles, what is the meticulousness, and all of these things. So, and you don't really look at that. How do they brush their teeth? How do they wash their face? What is their routines? When in the day is it? All of these things. And I would say that all of this is parts of, I think all of these things are bigger parts in creating the being we end up perceiving as, in different degrees, varying degrees, dependent on how you see. You say you have a more split nature of how you're feeling it. I have more of a union feeling of how I sense it, but we might be two extremes in this. But this, I think, all of these small parts and traces that we leave behind, that if a scientist could go in and investigate that, like you can follow certain patterns within a subject in physics, for instance, would say a lot more than we think about the person and the union that we are at this moment in time.
But I think also you said something very interesting, is that that fact that we are different, and I think it has so much to do also with the I mean obviously it has with a lot to do with individual predisposition for certain things, but I also think it has so much to do with upbringing. For example, I find Scandinavian upbringing to be hyper respectful towards children, where I'm not going to discuss the extent, because I think obviously it has kind of gone overboard with how much autonomy you are supposed to give to a child. But what is very apparent to me is that definitely upbringing in Scandinavia is defined by by a larger degree of freedom than Serbia was. Serbia was very contrived country, especially like, well, both for males and females. I mean, male stereotypes are all one thing, but the pressure that has been put on females from a very early age, it has had a very strong, like it has created a very what is a good word? Well, I'm not coming. I'm not coming with a good word. Like when a person is contrived within certain parameters, and you can't break free of that, because what you've learned throughout society is that this is how you're going to do things, and this is how you have to do things. And at the same time, like, and that upbringing made me, and obviously again in context of my own personal trajectory, it has made me grow so angry, so angry. But at the same time, I had to obey those rules, and potentially that split that we speak about is not only didn't only arise from the fact that I have the dual vision and etc., but also from the fact that I felt that there were so many things that were wrong. That was not how you're supposed to. Like, you were not supposed to act like that, and I knew that was wrong.
So
and then that kind of created, yeah.
You were reacting to society's confinement that was put upon you by your environment.
Confinement. That was the word. Yes, that was the word. Confinement. Yes, and that's exactly that. And potentially even this split and even this paralysis that I've experienced is exactly contingent upon the pressure and the expectations on one side, while me just being like yes. I have a lot of love for the world. A lot of love for the world, and I have kind of ended up in that dissonance where on one side I was very angry and on the other side I was like pure joy. And I think when this kind of started emerging again, well, not again, but when this started emerging, I felt happy, because it felt like I was being able to let go. And it is very like beautiful to look the evolutionary process from that point, where my letting go extends itself to the table and and other utensils that were surrounding me, and I was and kind of show these places like those cracks where my own spirit kind of essence starts to emerge. Yeah.
So I am thinking a bit about this piece, and especially the table. If we do this, because it's what is interesting to me, because I remember when you made the discovery of what you had been subconsciously creating here, that you were quite enamored by all these figures and stories that were within this place, that you were in a way just doing the task that you had to do with investigating how your colors were in relation to what you were doing other places. But you have sort of chosen a bit of an the road you've gone afterwards is that some of the figures you have, because you can go two directions with this. You could call it a finished piece as per it is, or you could choose to enhance or bring forth what is in there. And how do you relate yourself to that, and how do you think about those things?
Well, I mean, I love painting cutesy animals. I absolutely love that. Like, I think, like the whole, it's not a kawaii culture, but I think in since we had, it's a very fascinating cultural experience I've had, because we used to have a summer house in Montenegro where we would spend our summers. But what was available on TV, because like it was Japanese cartoons translated in Italian. So it was very interesting that a lot of Japanese culture actually reached Montenegro through Italy in a very bizarre way. And I was quite early introduced to kawaii culture and manga culture, and I loved that as well. I enjoyed it much more. Like most of my peers were, yeah, sure. And then they grew out of it, and I didn't. I mean, I was always a bit of an oddball in Serbia in that sense, or in Montenegro as well. So my relationship to cutesy animals is also kind of a this representation of my inner. But at the same time, I mean, look at this blue thing. Like it's a, it's a like a blue bulbous cat, and there is a sumo wrestler here, and like there's some kind of like weird monkey thing happening there, and there's a mushroom, and this big thing just kind of introducing you and letting you in the scene. I think
It's a
that's kind of,
giraffe with a cap.
it's a giraffe with a cap, like, and
You have the cat, and you have my favorite. I'm not sure if it is two frogs together or the four-eyed frog. I personally
where,
like the four-eyed frog. The fella is right over
oh
there.
yeah, you like that fella.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool, but it's a piece that I could kind of work on forever. It's not a finished piece, I have to say. Now, when I will
So
do
you would
something
like
with
to
the.
continue with it?
I would actually love to continue with this piece.
Because it was finished at some point.
It well, I would like in a sense it is finished, but now looking at it, I would love to do something with the sky.
Yeah, because I was gonna ask you that it's a very conscious choice you've done by keeping the sky as it is, which is sort of interesting as well, because you could call it like a night sky full of all the complexities that is actually in the night sky with different formations and forms. But I can also understand. I would wonder.
But that's the thing, like it's this discrepancy, like it's the difference, and I think like what we're starting to speak a bit about now is the difference between being an artist and being a painter, because there is a difference, and I think there is a difference that should be addressed, and I will address it if, like, in due time. But as an art piece, this is finished, and this is a very interesting discussion. As an art piece, this is a finished piece because I have my in well, my subconscious intention has not leaped, but I'm out of words today. I'm sorry. Has managed to achieve a dimension where the transfer has become materialized. So my thoughts, my feelings, my apprehension have become materialized through the means of transfer and what I've put on this table. So as an art piece, it's a done piece. But as a painting, it represents something else. And as a painting, I would like to change it. And I would like to change it because this dark gray that is in the background is not something that I want to. It's not that I don't want to, but I think that there are different additions that would represent my intention now in a better way than I was able to do it at that point. At that point, I was only concerned with unpetrifying myself, unfreezing myself. I think I worked like it took me 2 to 3 years to tone up, which is a very long amount of time.
I have an interesting thought, but I'm going to go on a tangent now.
No.
But if you think about the pure representation of it, how this has ended up being like light colored, very happy, all these animals of varieties, the moon coming up, potential Darth Vader in the moon.
I think this looks like an apple. I think that's the fascinating part. Like, do you see a stalk still here, and then like I think it looks like an apple. But yeah,
yeah, I can see.
Full moon or an apple?
No, the moon is this big white thing over here.
Oh, okay.
But you could have the moon up there as well. But you could also use this to represent you in the state that you are at. You have this gray cloud or heaviness that is on top, stopping all of this happiness to come up and participate and come to the surface. So the gray density is what you had to work through, and the bottom is where you were at.
That is a very beautiful interpretation. Thank you for that.
So now it depends how the painter and artist in you come to terms with how you continue with the piece.
I mean, you are actually like your chair is sheltering my favorite part. That whole, but it is very fascinating because to me, all of these pieces, and there again I will introduce them in the respective autonomies separately. But it was very fascinating to me to see for somebody whose pattern recognition has been always of a high degree of efficiency, to freeze when I was supposed to do something that I love. And I think there was such a strong dissonance within me that I could not reconcile for a very long time. And these pieces are fascinating exactly because they've showed me they have kind of a started that this is part where I started understanding that art is fulfilling its promise. You know, there's a lot of dimensions where people discuss why art is important, why art isn't important. And for example, you don't know this, in Germany they have extended a very large portion of money to for arts. So Germany, the state, has allotted a certain amount of funds to arts, which is I think it's a very big budget, very big budget, while UK is constantly slashing its own.
Okay. So in which manner is this budget utilized? Is this for the government to sort of buy and?
No, I think it was fun.
Or is it like funding to artists in forms of sponsorships, etc.?
I think all and. I think all of that. I think because
both could be effective ways. If you allow X amounts of millions to buy art from upcoming artists to put in place in public buildings, that would do a lot for an art.
But you know, I think they've done like 90 million euros or 190 million euros. It's some kind of like quite large number. And I'm sorry I don't recall that. I didn't think that I would speak about it. Otherwise, I would have pulled up the information. But we can do that later. However, I think it's very fascinating to think about what art is for and how art is for, and especially again in the context of me being very versed in psychoanalysis. I think it's very interesting, this dimension where your own opening up corresponds with the availability of the situation that allows you to open up and extend yourself in such a manner, and through those means achieve your own personal transcendence. And sometimes I hear, not sometimes, but a lot of the times I hear these words thrown around quite lightly, and in a very commercial sense, which obviously there's space and time for everything. But I think it's so fascinating to think that how the state, the city doesn't exist without individuals in it. The state does not exist as such. Any geographical look and anything, everything that we can observe is contingent about individuality, brought together into an assimilated mass or multiplicity. I'm sorry, not mass, multiplicity. So my own narrative is interesting exactly from the point where it accounts for a personal journey which has such levels of awareness where a mind has deteriorated and then used ability to recognize information through means of of the conversation with a blank canvas, and in that way understand what is happening, how it's happening, and restructure itself. And I think that's what makes art so gorgeous and why these pieces are so valuable to me and so important to me, exactly because they mark awakening and this toning up of the self to the self, and this kind of a return where I'm slowly kind of starting to gain back my old powers. And powers are a very interesting dimension to speak about in context of art, and a lot of different things. But I was a very capable person, and when I froze, when I think ultimately what happened in London is that a lot of trauma just surfaced due to the circumstances. And I also, like, living in Norway is a wonderful thing. You're quite shielded. And
Yeah, and also the part of society we were in was not necessarily provoking those types of underlying waves to come forth.
no, exactly. But when you come to London, I think I had to face all of those games and all of those things that I thought that people would surpass as we grow up, but I understand that we never do. And because it's an evolutionary process, it's not even the game, but it's just the process itself. And I think in that context, a lot of the barriers, these dreamlike barriers that kind of I've created, just broke. And a lot of trauma surfaced. And I had to deal with a lot of things that I don't know, wasn't ready, didn't think
You
I would
probably
have to.
had to deal with a lot of things that wasn't necessarily that clear, that had such a significant impact on your persona,
Yeah,
and had
yeah.
was such a large underlying part.
Yeah, exactly, because I was always used to just pushing. Oh, you know, that's how we.
Yeah, and also the safety of the environment that we came from in Norway, with you being a dentist, me being an engineer, how that is structured. Like it's a very static environment, to changing to a full-on dynamic every day where it all hinges on you and your own performance in a different manner.
And again, I've always just learned how to push myself. I mean, I've never had the luxury of not having to do that. So even in the context of art, when we're doing all of this, and I was doing all of this, I was trying to push myself and push myself and push myself, and I was yes, my head was hurting quite a lot because I was pushing through a wall, and then something cracked, and then it started to open up, and this opening up has, actually, what's my favorite character? Do you see there's like a kind of a weird green creature? It looks like almost like a green devil, like smiling, like posing naked, like its upper body thing. I will show it to you.
Oh yeah, I see it, but I'm
It
blocking.
looks. Do you see the red nipples?
Yes, but I am blocking it. I would call it yellow, but
No, it's light green. No, but you would call it yellow because of the shadow. We're not having this discussion. um,
you have a trained eye when it comes to color.
meow. But
I'm wondering about, because I need to say that this is one of the series I would be quite I would have liked this to be exhibited, because I would have liked to see the reactions and the apprehensions of people seeing this. Mostly because I'm wondering if it will be perceived more as abstraction, how it will be categorized, how people interact with these things. Because I feel that both you and I have a fairly developed pattern machine when it comes to these types of things. We see a lot of patterns in them, and both of us share this. And to me, it's very interesting to see, because I meet people who see these patterns and who don't, and it would be very interesting to see how just how people interacted with it and what they're left with after seeing this. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I mean, yes, yes, that is absolutely one of those things. However, actually, I have a different thought, and that is that the more and more, I mean, the world has changed tremendously over the last 4 years. Absolutely tremendously. I don't think we have even begun to grasp what has happened, but you can see it in art because artists are quite responsive. I think more and more art is kind of becoming digitalized, and my own work is digitalized now. So this whole trajectory that this journey that I'm taking you through is also the one of time. And that's a very that's a topic that I'm not going to discuss too much right now. I think it will have its own place later on. But you can what I see in these pieces are the remnants of abstract expressionism. Um, so a movement that was very popular, well, still is. I mean, definitely still is. And it's interesting to see if this, like, to me, almost this piece feels as it belongs in another world. Like, I feel that the jump that we've made with NFTs, with the digital art, with a lot of things, is of such character that it kind of feels like as it belongs to another world. So I think for me, what would be interesting to see is how people would interact with it in the context of now, and also who would find it interesting due to purely aesthetic, and who would find it valuable through the means of understanding the narrative behind, and how those two dimensions interact, the aesthetics versus the value given the context of narrative. Because if you also go back to Snickles and that whole series, we've spoken about how, I mean, art is nefarious for serving one thing, but then the story behind it being something very different. And I think that artists are quite proud of that in many ways, because you always have this dimension of pun, of intended and unintended pun. But how we perceive information is, I fell out. I was having such a long monologue and I fell out, and I'm sorry.
So how do they perceive information of the pun that is within art?
I think you take it as something as almost granted, but also this piece, you would say that this piece has, it's a scenery, there's explosion, there's a lot of etc etc, there's a lot of movement, there is a lot of things that have been, like, again, within the context of transfer and expansion, you have this movement captured within a 2D, well, 3D plane, because a lot of this is sticking out, but essentially in a compressed state, and yet it has such high energy. And I think what is fascinating to me is to observe the aesthetic versus the meaning, and how that affects the value of a piece. And I think because obviously every artist that kind of wants to live of art has to think about very thoroughly about this dimension of value. What is a valuable work, and for whom it is valuable? So for me, like, this dimension of travel in time is also the one that is highly contingent upon value, even like in geopolitical sense as well. But I'm not going to expand too much about that.
You're saving that for later.
I'll save that for later. And
well, it's interesting because I think people will see a lot of different things in this piece, and it also maybe it speaks to you in regards to what state of mind you are in, because there is things that can be seen in many different ways. For instance, you said explosion, which I thought was interesting, because I I do not necessarily perceive that.
Do you perceive like this high energetical impact, like busyness, like that?
Oh
That like,
yes, that form is there, but I was thinking more directly.
but there is something more that. Nah, I'm going to save that for later. It's kind of coming about. But I think that's what I kind of have to say about these pieces, and there are not many of them. There is this one pizza. There are a couple of cutting boards. I think that was actually. I think that's also a favorite piece of mine, where I'm utilizing. Like I've painted on a cutting board and on a chopping board, and I find that like art is a chopping board, which it actually is because it has, or at least through the ways I've utilized it. I have allowed it. It's not that the art has created space for that, but under the pretense of art, I have allowed myself to completely disseminate my own essence and analyze it to such a dimension where I was able to work through my own trauma and then reassemble myself in a way that I feel is coherent with my individuality. And I'm very happy and proud about that.
I also want to point out it's fairly obvious, of course, with all of these pieces, because none of them are made on what would be perceived as the standardized canvas. So I also think that is quite interesting that you have created this. Like there's not a lot of works, as you're saying, but there is, in a way, a series of work that is on such an unstandardized material as well. So there's definitely something to be unfolded there about the subconscious creation on these more daily objects that has become this important to you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a bit of a praxis that's been kind of introduced by Duchamp. Like, what is art, how it extends, you have the ready-made objects, etc., etc. But I love pizza boxes. I wish that I had like space to have a studio because I'm not going to delve with oil paint anymore. Kind of going back to this dimension of detoxifying, but I will speak about that also later because it's a part of another work which is very important to me. So that story will wait until next time. But I really enjoy painting on pizza boxes and the reflective pizza boxes. That's the beauty of this piece because as it folds, it kind of creates this reflective chamber where all the elements don't exist solely on the plane they've been painted on, but they also exist on a plane where they are reflected into something else, and as such they become a part of the information of a field that doesn't actually contain that.
So multidimensional painting.
Multidimensional painting. And I enjoyed that. I very much enjoyed that when I was painting that. Actually, I really wish to make more of these pizza things. Yeah. And yes.
Something to look out for in the future.
Yeah. Are we? How long have you spoken about?
I think we're at a good place in regards to the topic. We've talked about. Like we have the transfer, we've spoken about the importance of the extension.
Well, it's not it's not the transfer that is kind of a transfer of course, but transfer in the other context. I mean, there are a couple of like I've been. I think it's very interesting. I was reading. Who was it? Hegel? Was it Hegel? Or maybe Heidegger?
It seems like Hegel is going to be attributed with it in this case.
Or Heidegger. I was reading about their thoughts on preface. So in a book, when you write a book, somebody writes a preface, but preface is often written in the aftermath of the book, and I think that was their musings, that preface is usually written in the aftermath, and now you're kind of like the narrative that I'm presenting is essentially a preface to the presented works, in the sense that I am retroactively establishing a pattern of meaning and pattern of thoughts that have arisen within my mind when I was creating these pieces. Because for me, art is important. Art is only to me, art is important within the context of which thoughts have arisen within the artist's mind when it was created. Because in today's age, everybody can create a beautiful image, or an image that is visually captivating or aesthetically pleasing in one or the other way. But I think the meaning and the thoughts that are inside are something that should be con- is contingent upon the artist's reflection, or when those works are created, and what that means and how that means. So I think that this dimension of extension, where my own process, is extending unhindered throughout this whole room, because this room used to be my studio. And and there was also a point in time where my life was a mess, so my studio was a mess. I there was a friend that visited me, acquaintance that visited me, and she asked me, like, are you a dirty artist? And I was like, I don't know how to relate to that question, which kind of puts us back on the why we're acquaintance. But it was very interesting to see this dimension of extension, where my own mind was everywhere, and how I was dealing with a lot of things, and how all of that has exploded in my studio. And how that is captured within these works. So this dimension, if these works are about something, they're about the extension of the process and the extension of the self. When we were, I'll just tell you one last anecdote, and then we'll finish up here. And that is that when we started thinking about moving, I was kind of looking about all the pieces that we had around in our house. And I was thinking about how all of them are connected to the mindsetual dimension that has established a relationship of such character that they have been brought into our environment. So that means, in a way, they're acting as the extended self. And you usually speak of these things as points of identification. You identify with something. But I think that we should... I think there is more fruits to gather if we observe everything that we own/create through the means of the extension of the self. I think that kind of opens up a very interesting dimension to discuss the individuality, that the subjectivity that every individual's existence is contingent upon. Because again, individual becomes the individual becomes the multiple, and the multiple becomes the society that we know and live in. And for somebody who contemplates all the time why are things the way they are, I think this dimension of extension is a very important one to explore.
Yeah. I concur.
You concur? Okay. Then we are saying thank you again for listening. And I hope that my own process is helping you transcend, and acts as a form of I'm not going to say guide. This is not like a hierarchical dimension, but where I hope that it allows for you to explore more of your existence, and more of the existence that is shaping your own personal trajectories.
I am also intrigued and hope that this sparks some wonder, and I would like also to hear how people perceive this. I know that this video media isn't perfect for reflecting these pieces in their full grandeur, but it will be interesting to hear how people actually perceive and interact with it when they see these pieces. And I hope that our talk about them now and everything gives a bit of context to what they are and what has been important in creating them.
So thank you,
Thank you.
and then speak next time.